Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 4167. From last couple of days, I was kind of like a recording audio artifact. I'm not recording video artifact. The reason is that rain. Right now, it's kind of like a heavy rain actually happening day and night non-stop, and because of this thing, obviously, I cannot able to be kind of like a record video artifact. Nothing at all. By the way, right now I'm kind of like somebody walking on rooftop while holding umbrella. So yeah, all right. Like this is a kind of like a somebody part about rain that I don't like. Okay, yeah. Like everything got wet. Like everything got poured. Sorry, the word pronunciation is kind of like a very. All right, let's start. Okay, so this is my artifact episode number 4167. Today's date is the 21 July 2026. It's been almost like a night at 10:31 p.m. All right, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. Okay, so question is, what exactly is this thing? Okay, yeah. What value does user receive? Oh, that's a really good question. All right, yeah. First of all, what exactly is this question, and why am I asking this question to myself? Okay, so basically, this is I wanted to build a AI that could predict the future. Before I wanted to build such a AI that could predict the future, I wanted to know what might be consequences will gonna happen. Okay, so I went to ChatGPT. I tell that I wanted to build AI that could predict the future. Suggest me kind of like 100 possible consequences in question format. ChatGPT kind of like suggest me hundreds of possible consequences in question format. This is one of those questions. Now regarding about the question says that question says that he why would what type of what exactly what value does user receive okay yeah. What value does user receive okay yeah. What value does user receive means like that. Now what exactly the user that it get like basically if you made a kind of like a simply AI that could predict the future, what kind of like a stuff that get for the people, for like people who are kind of like using, what kind of like a value does it get? That's really good. Okay, so okay, first of all is that na ki let's understand the kind of like a important about the value and how you get the value. Okay, example, if you went to shopkeeper and you went to you are ask you kind of like give them 10 rupees, then probably that particular person kind of like give you Maggie or things and that the whatever stuff that you want. So basically what exactly is this thing, you are kind of like exchange the value. Okay, yeah. Like basically you kind of like give the 10 rupees and in return of 10 rupees you kind of like get the Maggie. Okay, so basically these are kind of like assembly you are exchange the value. Okay, yeah. Now when you kind of like do the trading, like we actually call that trading, like we actually trade the money with product. Okay, like we kind of like give the money, other person kind of like give the product. Okay, so that is called kind of like a trade. Okay, yeah. Now this is kind of like a trade, or this is kind of like a trade means there is kind of like a value that you are get is a instantly, right? You are kind of like getting instant, right? If you want to get instant value, then what exactly is this thing, you have to kind of like paid much more amount of effort. Like basically is this thing, instead of kind of like a I'm kind of like a simplified even more much more better, because money is not always been kind of like a very like a example. So basically I'm going to use effort plus value. Okay, like how much kind of like we put the effort, and instead of that how much value that you get. Okay, yeah. So let's understand this couple of stuff. Okay, yeah. So let's understand the effort. Someone kind of like told me to dig the hole for 10 feet. I kind of like somebody dig the hole for 10 feet, and in returns that particular person kind of like give me money. So what exactly is this thing, I am kind of like putting effort, I'm digging the hole and kind of like somebody getting the money. So is that kind of like somebody instant? Yeah, this is called kind of like somebody instant. Like basically is this thing, I am getting my value instantly. Now this is kind of like a somebody, if we do the kind of like some sort of reverse, then it might be kind of like a look very differently. Example, you went to the shopkeeper and you kind of like give them 10 rupees, that shopkeeper kind of like give you Maggie. Okay, yeah. So in this particular thing, you are how much kind of like a effort that you put, like basically that 10 rupees are actually came from somewhere, right? Because before that you kind of like dig the hole. So basically is this thing, you put the effort for digging the hole, you get the money of 500 rupees. From that 500 rupees you spend the 10 rupees on kind of like a spending money to buy a kind of like a Maggie. Okay, and in the Maggie you kind of like get the Maggie and you kind of like make the Maggie and things and that. So you are kind of like getting value regarding about the taste, like the Maggie is a kind of like a taste really good and things and that. So like this is what it is, like basically we are kind of like a simply trade effort with the value. Now if we kind of like a think from bigger point of perspective, then we kind of like a seen very differently. Like basically what if we kind of like a put the effort now, but we will not gonna get the value now, we will kind of like get the value later. Okay, yeah. So when you try to do this in this, when you try to perform this particular transaction or this particular kind of like a trade, then you are kind of like getting value much more. Example, let's just say you are kind of like a putting an effort, let's just say kind of like X amount of effort. Okay, yeah. So when you put X amount of effort, you will kind of like get X amount of value, right? This is a kind of like a normal example. Like basically 10 rupees of kind of like a 10 rupees you kind of give the shopkeeper kind of like give you Maggie. So basically you kind of like put X amount of effort, you will kind of like get X amount of value. Okay, yeah. Now if you add time into it, means like that if you put the effort now and you will kind of like get the value later. Later means like that after some sort of amount of time. So when you add time into it, then what will gonna happen, the value will double, or maybe value will kind of like get little bit higher. Like basically let's just say you are putting effort, X amount of effort, then you are putting, when you are kind of like getting the value after some sort of time, then you are kind of like getting value 2x or maybe 3x regarding about how much time that you are kind of like getting. Example, let's just say YouTuber. Okay, YouTuber is a kind of like a really good example. The first 4 years of YouTuber are kind of like a very drown, like a kind of like a things. They are kind of like a putting effort every single day. They are making videos after videos after video. Like a channel is not even monetized, nothing really at all. Just kind of like a very struggle and things and that. Okay, yeah. But after 4 years, when he kind of like put that effort, and after the 4 years of he kind of like a struggle and things and that, he understand the YouTube, and after he understand the YouTube, he kind of like simply give the kind of like simply he earn monies, and kind of like he is earning money so much that kind of like simply a kind of like simply like a normal day job cannot able to be earn money. The YouTuber kind of like earning that much amount of money. Why? Because of that he is kind of like putting effort with time. Okay, yeah. So basically he's kind of like put the effort with respect to time, so that's why he's kind of like getting 2x or 3x amount of value. Okay, same thing goes with the kind of like SIP, mutual fund, or kind of like a stock market. Like not stock market is a kind of like a not really good example, but mutual fund and SIP would be kind of like a much more better. Let's take a kind of like SIP. Okay, yeah. So in the SIP you are kind of like investing money. Okay, and you are kind of like invest money for at least like a 10-20 year, and after that you are kind of like getting almost like a 2x 3x amount of value. Okay, so that is called kind of like simply when you put amount of effort, and when you kind of like get value at some certain amount of time, then you are kind of like getting value in much more higher in number, or much more higher, or double or triple and things and that. All right, yeah. But sometimes the effort and kind of like something, the value is not kind of like depend on you. Sometimes it kind of like depend on other people and things and that. Example, let's just say you are kind of like paying money for taxes. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing that you are filing the tax and things and that. Now what exactly you are putting the effort, like basically you are trading the kind of like some money for it, right? Now in that particular scenario, when you kind of like put the effort, like kind of like you are paying the taxes and things and that, what kind of like a value that you are getting? Okay, you are kind of like getting value like a good road, electricity, kind of like some water connection, or better governance and things and that, right? So this is what it is, like basically you are kind of like putting effort and you are kind of like getting value, but that value is kind of like depend on so many levels, like regarding about government, regarding about kind of like how much kind of like basically where you are live and things and that. Okay, yeah. So this is what it is. Now let's understand the couple of things. Okay, yeah. Now if I'm kind of like thinking from what value that user will kind of like get if I build such a AI that could predict the future. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, my like a model or kind of like a AI Adam is not a kind of like a for everybody. Okay, yeah. And obviously I'm not kind of like a made Adam for mass communication or mass kind of like a people. No, definitely not. This is a kind of like a very such a like, it's like I'm not really sure. Like basically is this thing na ki sometime I kind of like a realize something, but sometime I realize that no, I don't know nothing about that. Okay, why I'm saying this thing, let me kind of like tell you. So basically is this thing that key people will kind of like a utilize for wrong purposes. Everything, like everything, this is kind of like a somebody the human behavior, not just a human behavior, but kind of like some nature law, that the whatever kind of like a somebody product that you invented, the probability of success that you get after some sort of time, not in kind of like a instantaneous. Example, let's just say kind of like a internet. So when the internet came, people are kind of like a started use. I'm kind of like a saying as a kind of like a normal kind of people. Okay, yeah, like basically kind of like a like basically there are some kind of people who are kind of like utilizing internet for right kind of like a purposes, but at the beginning most of people are kind of like utilizing internet for wrong kind of like a purposes, like entertainment or kind of like a watching porn or things and that. But after some sort of time, people are kind of like a realize and they are kind of like a utilize internet for right purposes, and we are seeing the advantage of it in today's world right now. Same goes with the AI. Like at the beginning when the AI came, people are kind of like making a lot of AI videos and kind of like images and things and that and that and that and that. It will gonna happen at the beginning, but like basically this is kind of like a somebody like people are kind of like utilize the new technology for kind of like a entertainment purpose, kind of like a entertainment purpose. Okay, yeah. And for this particular purpose, usually kind of like people using it, but then after that people are right now kind of utilizing AI for right purposes and things like that, to kind of like making sure of productivity kind of like a much more better and things and that and that. So at the beginning people are kind of utilize technology for wrong purposes or wrong kind of like a things. Okay, yeah. Now same goes with the kind of like my product too. Now my product is a kind of like a predict the possibility of future. Now what might gonna people will kind of like a predict, like what will kind of like a people will kind of like a do, people will gonna say predict my future, predict my things, predict like a tell me what will gonna happen and things and that and that. No, I didn't really build my platform for this particular purpose. Okay, definitely not. Like basically it's not really that ki Adam will not kind of like a try to kind of like a predict your future. It can, but it does not kind of like a serve a good purpose. Like basically what exactly is this thing, Adam is a kind of like a build for a kind of like a couple of things. What is exactly that thing? That thing is that key simulation process. Basically, is this thing. I build Adam for kind of like a somebody for processes. Like basically, let's just say a kind of like a government wanted to kind of like execute a new policy, then they don't know what will kind of like some impact on people and things and that and that. Okay, like there are kind of like so many kind of like a spoiled policy that we have in the government that kind of like ruin the kind of like people lives and things and that because they don't really have proper data regarding about what does people think, what will gonna happen and things and that. Let's just say kind of like a suddenly E20. Okay, yeah, E20, like basically what's exactly E20? So E20 is a kind of like a something fuel where ethanol blending is actually kind of like a blend into our fuel to kind of like reduce the dependency on crude oil and things and that, which is kind of like a really good implementation. But the problem is that now the execution of the E20 is in India specifically right now is kind of like a very wrong. Like basically they are kind of like the implementation plan should supposed to be happen like basically what exactly happened that India achieved E20 plan very early. Like basically E20 plan should supposed to be implemented till 2030, but kind of like that key. Sorry about this. There are so much wind, there are so much amount of kind of like a something rain, and I'm kind of like a holding umbrella, and umbrella is kind of like a little bit of dinky and things and that, and one hand is kind of like holding my mobile phone. So basically my both hand are kind of like a something like a tied, and another thing is that I'm recording artifact and kind of like a lot of stuff, whatever. Okay, so let's just jump into it. Okay, so basically my platform or Adam, I didn't really build Adam for kind of like a somebody for kind of like a predicting the kind of like a what is exactly my future and things and that. No, I didn't really build for that. I built Adam for kind of like a finding mistake. Okay, like basically government kind of like a build the policy, and sometime kind of like a, when they build the policy, they don't know how they should supposed to be implement. They kind of like a implement. They think that this will kind of like a way to kind of like add value and things and that to our citizen, to our country, but like technically that is not. Why? Because of that na ki on the paper the plan look kind of like a really good, but when you try to implement with the real people or real life, then things might gonna change happen. Like there are a lot of kind of like a possibility will gonna happen and things like that are. Let's say kind of like in India, E20 adoption, ethanol blending. So basically India actually achieve ethanol blending very early. Like basically is this thing that na ki we should supposed to be achieve E20 ethanol blending 20% should supposed to be achieved till 2030, but we actually achieve very earlier, like a 2025. Then what will gonna happen because of that? Ki the all the vehicles are not kind of like simply complied for kind of like a E20 fuels, and that's why because of the corrosion happened, the engine got damaged, and things and that and that, which is kind of like a really wrong, because E20 is a kind of like a really good implementation. The it's a very noble decision from the government, which kind of like a really add value not only to the economy, to the people lives and everything. But even after even after the plan is really good, but execution is kind of like a very wrong. And what is actually happening with the execution? They kind of like a hurry so much. Like basically is this thing they implemented kind of like a e-blending so much and things and that, and that's why kind of like a simply ethanol blending in India is a kind of like a became little bit of failure. So basically what is actually happened that na ki what if kind of like those are kind of like implementation happen actually in the simulation process. Like basically in the simulation process, what if the government will kind of like run the policy in the simulation process, and they will try to kind of like run the scenario and kind of like somebody in present situation, and they kind of like make mistakes, and from that mistake the policy maker will kind of like understand that okay, like we shouldn't supposed to do this thing, we should supposed to do like that. Like basically the Adam is a kind of like a simulation program, will kind of like somebody allow you to make mistakes, so that you will kind of like know and learn from the mistakes and kind of like refine your execution plan much more better, so that when you try to implement in real world, it will kind of like simply exactly, it will kind of like add value, and there is no bottleneck or there is no throttle or there is no kind of like simply challenges will gonna happen. And as also is this thing, when you try to execute any kind of like a plan, if you think that you could execute plan in kind of like a multiple phases, or kind of like a depends on one or another and things and that, like instead of kind of like a try like every person or every government are try to good things to the citizen, to the people and things like that. But the problem is that na their reality and their kind of like imagination are kind of like a way much kind of like a far away from each other, and that's why most of the policies or most of the kind of like assembly the laws and things and that got failed, because they don't know what might gonna happen in real situation. Example, let's just say kind of like assembly in India, kind of like a basically women empower program, like a basically government decided that ki kind of like a let the women kind of like assembly educate much more better and things like that. Now which is kind of like a very noble, by the way, like the decision is kind of like a bit more noble, like it is kind of like enforced to women to kind of like learn more, educate more, they kind of like stand on their self on their feet and things like that, which is kind of like a really good thing. But there is also another problem might gonna happen, like basically if the woman will kind of like assembly something really kind of like assembly educated and things like that, then kind of like a divorce rate will gonna happen too and things like that, which is also like basically that is a kind of then what should you supposed to, should you not let the kind of like a woman to educate? No, let them educate, but kind of like a making sure that na divorce rate shouldn't supposed to be happen that much. Try to make sure that na ki everything should supposed to happen, like basically every action comes with the consequences, even if your kind of like a action is kind of like a bit more noble, or your thought process actually kind of like a bit more noble, but when you try to implement that thing, it will kind of like simply impact you very hard, because of that ki even if your action is kind of like a bit more noble, but your execution is completely different than reality, because in the reality things might gonna very wrong. Okay, because the reality is kind of like a very like a chaotic, like it's not completely right, like the reality that we are living is not white and it's not black, it's a kind of like a gray area, and in that gray area we can't define how much gray that, like how much black it is and how much white it is. And that's what kind of like Adam will be there. Adam is kind of like a understand the what is exactly gray pattern would be, and from that gray pattern it understand and it kind of like implement the kind of like assembly possible consequences in much more better way to kind of like a amplified like a, I don't know how I supposed to explain this thing. It's a kind of like a simply like I realized something that ki if I like basically let's just imagine a kind of like a things that na ki if you are kind of like a practicing for kind of like a somebody speech, okay, yeah, now basically the first time you kind of like a wrote the speech on the paper, now you are started kind of like a try to like a kind of like implement first, then you are kind of like implement first means like that ki you are trying, okay, you are kind of like a trial one to how do I supposed to give the speech. First trial is kind of like a complete failure. Your tone change, you are kind of like a pathetic, your tone kind of like a really pathetic, you are not kind of like a putting that much amount of effort in sentence and things and that it kind of like a feel like you just kind of like somebody reading the kind of like a somebody script in front of hundreds of people. It doesn't really make sense at all. So basically what should you supposed to do, you are try to kind of like a try another you kind of like understand the mistake, you make mistake in trial one, you realize that what is actually that mistake, and you are not try to that mistake again and try to refine your kind of like a execution of speech again, and then you try to do this thing again, and then you try to do this again you are try to do this thing in kind of like a trial run almost like a 10-20 time, and after you kind of like do this thing 10-20 times, and after kind of like somebody after you kind of like went into the auditorium hall, and then you kind of like execute your speech, you are kind of like executing speech very well. This is what actually happened when you kind of like do the trial and error and find out. This is what kind of like a better way to kind of like improve your product or improve your kind of like a policy much more better way, right? Now basically in kind of like assembly in reality, like this kind of like a word is kind of like the sentence that I told you is kind of like a bit more right and things and that, but the problem is that sometimes kind of like some product or some kind of like a policy are how do you supposed to run in trial. Like basically let's just say kind of like if the government decided that ki implement a kind of like a policy program regarding about the healthcare and things and that, so in that healthcare how they should supposed to be execute that particular thing they really require a kind of like a real data with the real people and things and that they cannot able to be kind of like a trial the policy, right? But Adam kind of like a give you that freedom. Like basically Adam is a kind of like a give you that scenario, get that kind of like a things that key you will kind of like a do the trial and error in the kind of like a scenario, because like Adam is kind of like a do that simulation for you, do that kind of like execution for you, and from that thing Adam will kind of like a make mistake, because Adam run on the kind of like a probability ratio regarding about the present point of perspective, and Adam will try to kind of like understand that what is really wrong thing will gonna happen, and how do we supposed to kind of like refine the product or refine the kind of like a services or refine refine the policy to kind of like how do I supposed to perform much more better in long-term point of perspective. So this is what kind of like Adam will kind of like does. It will not gonna add value into the individual people, but it will gonna add value to the kind of like thousands of people without even knowing them. Okay, so this is what kind of like Adam power comes from. Okay, and that is a value that I wanted to provide to the people and things and that. Adam is not a kind of like chat GPT that you kind of like ask that key generate me a kind of like image for me and it kind of like generate. No, Adam is a kind of like a I build such a AI or kind of like a prediction model that could kind of like predict the possible consequences that might gonna happen, and how do I supposed to make sure that that possible future kind of like as much as better as possible. It's not a kind of like a only fortune teller who kind of like tell you that kind of like till the age of this day you will kind of get in relationship and things and that. No, that is not the thing. I build the Adam for kind of like only making mistake and learn from that mistake and kind of like try not to do that mistake and try to kind of like repeat that scenario again and again to kind of like refine the product, refine the services, refine the policy as much as better as possible. And how much it gonna add value, it will gonna not only add not only gonna add value to the kind of like a government, it will gonna add value to the institutional level, like a basically company or trust or any kind of like a organization who kind of like a run on people or things and that. It will kind of like a work on that. It will also kind of like add value in kind of like a other prediction model, like a basically weather prediction model, or kind of like a somebody that key like a celestial body, how it kind of like a performs and things and that. Because the Adam is kind of like a run on probability, and probability is a kind of like a somebody core truth of universe. Like I was kind of like figure it out what is actually right and wrong thing, but I realized that in the universe the right and wrong thing is not actually exist. In the universe actually exists a probability ratio, like everything actually happened in probability, like every action actually happened regarding about what it is exactly probability will gonna happen. Probability means like that how much effort that you put, and in that effort how much value that you get. Means like that, like let's just say like a day before yesterday I kind of like watch kind of like a Argentina versus Spain World Cup final football. So Spain is a kind of like a putting a lot of amount of effort and things like that, but no one actually hit the goal. But at the kind of like a last 10 minute, Spain hit the kind of like a 2 goal. Is not only because of that Argentina is actually weak, is because of that Spain is actually putting a lot of amount of effort, and from that effort they kind of like hit the 2 goal. Argentina did not really put that much amount of effort. That's why they didn't really hit the goal. That's why they didn't really win the match. And this is what kind of like a somebody the probability would be kind of like that. Ki who will kind of like a probability higher chances that we will gonna win. The Spain would have kind of like a really higher chances because they are kind of like a putting that much amount of effort. Like this actually happened in kind of like a people simulation scenario, as well as it also happened in kind of like a celestial body like a Earth. How does kind of like a planet Earth rotate around the sun? How does kind of like a somebody Sagittarius A kind of like expand through local groups and things like that. There are so many kind of like things that actually happen through probability ratio. Like why does kind of like a comet are actually exist? Why does kind of like a meteor or every planet actually move around each other? It works on probability, and probability is a kind of like ultimate truth for kind of like every possible universal event and things and that. Okay, yeah. So this is what it is. This is what kind of like things. And Adam kind of like simply work on probability architecture, and from that probability architecture, we could kind of like define the possible future might gonna happen because of the kind of like assembly multiple thousands of millions of kind of like a consequences in simulation format, and we would kind of like predict the possible future that might gonna happen. It is a kind of like assembly a trial and error. Like basically if I try to kind of like execute in explain in simple language, Adam is a kind of like assembly trial and error. It could kind of like assembly do the error, it try again, it do the error, try again, it do the either try again. This is why kind of like simply Adam will kind of like refine the kind of like a product, services, policy, everything, scenario, situation, everything to kind of like do this thing to kind of like making sure our product is kind of like as much as better as possible. And it will not only add value to the individual people, it will gonna add a value not only to the human but as well as kind of like simply every community of the people, not only the people but everything. We will kind of like fix the planet. Literally, like basically is this thing, there is a plastic pollution, how do you supposed to control it? There are so many possible consequences will gonna happen to Adam kind of like give you the scenario, and from that scenario we will kind of like making sure that the plastic pollution will not gonna happen. It will gonna add no, yeah, it will not gonna add value in personal level, but it will gonna add value in entire humanity. And this will kind of like somebody Adam is actually made for. So basically what kind of like some user kind of like get value when I kind of like build the Adam, it will not gonna kind of like get individual value, it will kind of like get value in a kind of like a community level. Okay, yeah. And that is what I built for Adam. Okay, yeah. It's a kind of like so many things. Like if I'm trying to talk about this particular stuff, there is a lot of stuff, but still these are kind of like my empty words because I don't know what the execution process. Like I was kind of like thinking about this thing. I'm trying to think about all the possible scenarios and things and that before I wanted to implement. But when I try to implement, things might gonna get little bit crazy because of I don't know regarding about execution process, technicality, and how do I supposed to execute that thing. But I believe that I could able to do this thing, and this is the value that kind of like a user will get from the Adam. All right, this is it. I have to be end here. Right now I'm kind of like ending very quickly, not only because of that I am kind of like somebody wanted to quit, but because of that the kind of like a rain and kind of like some wind and kind of like my umbrella is kind of like a bit more dinky and things and that. So probably I have to quit. All right, so this is it. I have to be end here, and thank you.